All right. Welcome, everybody, to Finance Essentials with Danny Hudson. I am your host, Danny Hudson, and I've got a special gift for you guys tonight. The first part of it is that you don't have to listen to me talk to myself for 30 to 40 minutes because I have a special guest. And I would say at this point in time right now, he's probably one of the most up-and-coming voices of the Liberty movement. Whether or not he intentionally meant it to be that way, it's kind of happened. But it is Clint, who is the host of the Liberty Lockdown podcast. Clint, welcome aboard.
Thank you so much for having me. I do not know why I'm ascending, but I am, and I am eternally grateful and appreciative that people are interested in hearing what I have to say. So
Absolutely
I appreciate you having me on.
And I have a theory too, and we'll get to it. I think okay. You might disagree, but my guess is most of the people listening probably will agree.
Okay, cool.
So first off, I noticed that that recently you hit a milestone, right? You got what, 50,000 listens over the span of 30 days, right?
I did. Yeah, I did. I started about 11 months ago, and I had 100,000 listens total, and half of that came over the past 30 days, and that was after I had on Scott Horton and Dave Smith. So not just people came over to see those guys come on my show, but they stuck with me, and I was blown away by that.
Absolutely. And that's YouTube as well as, Apple, and that's kind of all aggregated, right?
I was actually only including the audio downloads. So YouTube would be additional, but I only get I don't know, a fifth of my activity is probably on YouTube.
Yeah, that's really interesting how that works out. Because I mean, obviously I'm not at the same scale that you are, but I've also noticed the same thing where I'll log into YouTube and I'll look at the listens and I'm like, well, that's not that many. And then I look at the audio and I'm like, wow, that's a lot better. So
exactly. Yeah, I think, and I only started my YouTube in December. So that's largely the reason is that I was driving people to subscribe to the podcast for the longest time. And then a bunch of people started, especially since I was having all these beautiful women come on my show, I was like, I should probably have a video platform so I could take advantage of this. So I added that.
Of eye candy out there. Maybe I should think about doing that.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll have to get a list. Be like, these are the ones that really help me drive, some subscribers,
I'll tell you, it's pretty easy. Just go and look at the most beautiful libertarian and anarchist women, and then send them a DM and say, hey, would you like to come on?
That's like, look, I know only 50 of you exist, but the 10 of you I want, to come onto my show. Well, that's great. I mean, that's quite the accomplishment, and here's to more continued success.
Thank you.
I don't know if you're able to hear that thunder in the background, but
that was significant.
Yeah. Well, if we happen to lose power, then it was great chatting with you.
Exactly.
So one of the things that I know you mentioned, you did include a video element around episode 50. I will admit I have not gone back and listened to the full Liberty Lockdown catalog, but I do know that you did start it. Obviously with it being in the name, Liberty Lockdown and that kind of thing. What would you say is kind of the reasoning for starting it, and then how it kind of evolved? Because I know based off of your guests and the content of the episodes that you've done, you don't necessarily talk specifically about the lockdown stuff, right? Now you get into a lot more of libertarian theory, a lot more free state project, a lot more high level philosophical stuff than I'm assuming you probably did at the beginning.
Yeah, well, really the inspiration for the show was the lockdown. I was extremely put off by the fact that was, 1, being attempted, and 2, being accepted. And then 3, the fact that the LP wasn't losing their fucking minds about it. So those 3 things are what inspired me to actually get going. Ultimately, yeah, I don't talk about the lockdowns all the time simply because they are kind of lifting a little bit. But moreover, I think that our liberty has been locked down for a very, very long time. And I don't think that it has anything to do with the specific lockdown. So I don't think that I need to rename, because it's, until we get our liberty back, the name applies. And ultimately, if we get our liberty back, I will gladly stop doing this show. So I'm not holding my breath on that front. In fact, I am using my breath a lot every day, multiple times a week, to try and get the message out and to wake people up. So yeah, it's I mean, I have very diverse interests, so I would never want to, you know, pigeonhole myself into a single narrowly focused topic. But because the inspiration was the lockdown, I just thought it was a good starting point.
Sure. No, absolutely. And I think too, one of the benefits that you've had is right, is as you continue to grow the audience and you've been able to evolve the show, you've also been able to be a good voice for other areas that you also find important. One of those being, I know I've been listening in now for probably about 25 episodes, basically from the time that you started on YouTube. And one of the things that I've really appreciated lately is that I feel like you've opened up more about yourself, you know, kind of your history, you know, and what kind of got you into liberty as a whole. And so now I feel like you're kind of bringing people along for your ride, you know, which I think is great. And to speak to that, one of the things that I thought was very interesting when you did Mike's show, the Invictus Mind, is that you talked about growing up and your family was relatively liberty oriented, and you had those long drives, right, where you're like, all right, well, we're in a car for 4 hours. What the hell are we going to do for the next 4 hours? Because we're gonna talk. But you also use the word indoctrination. You know, and my guess is it was deliberate. Most people generally tend to think of indoctrination with a very negative connotation, right? Government, government schools, the corporate press, that kind of thing. Was there any specific reason why that you would refer to it? Because most people, I think, would say, well, I was influenced, but you specifically used the indoctrination. Was there a specific reasoning behind that?
Yeah, I think it's just as simple as when you're a kid, you're so easily influenced that it'd be tough to say that I was just being influenced. Like it goes beyond that, because he's my father. Right. Like, I'm 5. Obviously, I'm going to take this as the gospel. Right. So I think it's the same thing with religion. If you're raised religious, that sticks a lot easier than if you're a 25-year-old and someone comes knocking on your door saying, have you accepted Jesus into your heart? You're like, get off my porch. Yeah. So it's just a different vibe. And I don't think that indoctrination is necessarily bad if the principles that are being driven into you are good. And it's not as if I was forced, but I was stuck in a car with my dad for 4 hours both ways. So it's a little bit of a, you know, a hostage audience kind of situation. But I really enjoyed it. And I think ultimately I was kind of built for it anyways, so I don't look at it at all negatively, and I don't intend to use it for a negative connotation whatsoever. I'm just saying that it's very deeply ingrained in me. Yeah. And it came from such an early age that it's like, it's pretty much impenetrable at this point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think too, and one of the things that I've been honest with my audience in the past is that the purpose of doing this essentially is to, I wouldn't say manipulate, but indoctrinate people with my line of thinking, right? And you do the same thing with your show. It's the term indoctrination is just generally, you know, like, again, we would look at it from the public school system, which I'm pretty sure that you and I would have a very similar view, you know, as far as the public school system. So I thought the wording there was very interesting. And another thing too that I tend to find pretty fascinating is that most of the time when kids grow up, they tend to go through a rebellion stage, you know, and so did you end up having something along those lines? Because I would have thought, and again, it's not applicable to everybody, but when you do have those kinds of indoctrinations and influences, you reach that certain age where you're like, this is what my parents are into, I'm going hard the other way, or anything like that. Did anything like that ever happen as you were growing up?
Well, I would say I definitely rebelled, but I didn't rebel ideologically. And I think there's a good reason for it. I think that at its core, the beauty of libertarianism is that it is rebellious, because it is throwing off the shackles. It is saying, I need no ruler. So at its core, I didn't have to rebel from the ideology because I was implementing it, you know, and if I were to throw it off, I would have had to have basically, you know, accepted rulers, because it's like, so I was a very rebellious kid. I don't think that's ever changed. But I think because the philosophy itself is one ensconced in freedom and rebellion anyways, I didn't have to.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I view it. But otherwise, yes, my parents would definitely say I rebelled plenty.
Did you ever go to them and go, "This is your fault. You guys were teaching me this when I was 5."
Oh yeah.
Like,
Oh yeah. Yeah. Like the good thing is, I mean, the person who really taught it to me was my dad, who I wasn't raised with. I would only see him one weekend a month. So my mom and my stepdad had to really put up with this ideology taking hold. So I got to use it as a rebellious thing against them, where I was like, "You're not my ruler. I'm an independent person. I'm an individual," you know? And they're like, "You're 6, shut up."
Yeah, you're like 7 years old. You're like, "Let me tell you about the non-aggression principle, because what you are doing right now is aggressing against me."
Exactly. So I think that at its core, it is rebellious.
And I think too, and you've mentioned this before, and you've talked about it before, that you've essentially always been an entrepreneur, right? You've always kind of done your own thing. Did you ever? I know you had done a little bit of work in the industry. I think it was with your dad, right? And you kind of started going off on your own thing. Yep. When you were growing up, I know you mentioned too, you were selling candy at the school, right? Whenever you were a kid and that kind of thing. Did you ever end up getting like a part-time job for somewhere in high school, and it only lasted for like a week or two, and you're like, "What the hell am I doing? This is I can't do this."
Well, it never lasted only a week or two, but I did a ton of jobs. I mean, I did a ton of 4, 5, 6 month jobs, all for $4 to $5 an hour, because that's how old I am, and that's what it was back then.
Right.
And it was awful. I think that the greatest thing about those entry level jobs, if you're anything built like me, the main thing you take away from it is not the paycheck, but a lesson. Yep. A lesson that you want to end that cycle of hell as soon as possible. So because I had a job at Wendy's and Albertsons, I was a bagger, I was a delivery guy, delivered pizzas for years. I did that all through college. And that was probably the best job I had, just because it was the most independent.
Right.
But what I learned about myself through all of these avenues was that I'm a very independent person, and I do not like taking orders from people. And I was like, okay, what can I do that I can actually benefit my life, but not have to listen to someone who's not even as smart as me tell me what to do? Right. Well, you can start your own company. So that's what you do. Yeah. So came out of college, worked for my dad for 5 or 6 years. We had a falling out over some, negotiations where I was supposed to end up being a partner with him. He kind of dogged me on it, and I was like, all right, I'm out of here. Like, I can do this on my own. He's like, oh yeah, sure you can. And sure enough, I started my own company, and I made more than he did in his last year of business. I made it on my own in my first year of business without any employees, whereas he had 6. So it was like, I was right. So that was very gratifying.
I'm sure he gave you a very heartfelt apology too, right?
He didn't apologize, but he did. He is very proud of me now, and we have actually really good relationship, and he's still one of my largest investors. So like, it's all gravy. Like it was a natural growing pain between a father and son. Is how I view it.
Did you rib him a little bit about that whenever you got to that point?
I don't actually, just because I feel like I won anyways. I don't need to dig the
don't need to gloat.
Yeah, I don't need to.
No, that's fair. Now it's interesting though that you bring up with him being one of one of your biggest investors. For the folks that are listening, and Clint, clarify me if I'm wrong, but you've essentially liquidated your business, and for various economic reasons and that kind of thing. With him being one of your biggest backers, did you get much pushback from him, or did he look at you and go, you know what, I actually completely understand?
Yeah, fortunately, because we have such similar backgrounds ideologically and philosophically and economically, we see things very similarly. So while he is still interested in churning his portfolio and rolling it into new trust deeds, he realizes what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. So he hasn't really given me any pushback. He's very supportive of my show. He thinks it's great that this is what I'm doing as the alternative to what I had been doing. So he hasn't had any complaints, but I think that if anything, by doing this, I have influenced him to consider pulling back from the market as well, more seriously than he probably would have, because he likes to keep that passive income rolling in, and I totally get that, and I respect that. But it's like he lived through 2008 with me as well. Right. We know how bad this shit gets, and I'm just like, dude, do you want to do it again? You're almost 70 years old. Do you want to do this again?
Right.
And I'm just trying to drive that point home.
No, I think that, I mean, I think that makes perfect sense. And that would make me think too, because I believe, and I don't remember which specific episode that it was that you were talking about, where, you know, it's very difficult to understand which way this might go. And so you're deleveraging, you're essentially liquidating, but then you're also looking at kind of hedging, right?
Yes.
And so for the folks that might not have heard that conversation, can you give us a little bit of thoughts on the two primary directions where you believe that the current market environment could potentially go?
Yeah, I am of the belief that we have two cataclysmic options. We end up in a hyperinflationary death spiral or a deflationary one. And I don't think that there is an alternative. I don't think there is a soft landing, quote unquote. So my belief is that, and this is not financial advice, this is just my analysis,
Sure, absolutely.
is that it is prudent to have diversification that hedges both ways. What hedges against deflation? Well, in a deflationary environment, cash is actually the best thing you should hold. And this is a very counterintuitive libertarian argument, because libertarians absolutely
we
hate
love
it when
fiat,
I say this.
right?
Yeah, and I don't. I hate fiat, but what I really love though is buying depressed assets. Absolutely love it.
Yeah.
And if you don't have liquidity when the shit hits the fan, you can't do that.
Right.
So that has been my biggest message to people, is that do not think that just because they are printing all this money and they're letting all these people borrow and everything, that it's impossible that we have another debt collapse.
Sure.
Because
Fortunes were
so
made, right, in 2008, 2009 for that very reason.
Exactly. I made a huge chunk of my net worth just by buying and holding and selling real estate from '08 through, or from '09 through today. So it's, if you don't have the dry powder, as I call it, to be a player in that moment, you're going to regret it big time.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people think, oh, well, Clint, I can just hedge with crypto. Crypto got crushed when you saw the deflationary collapse in March of 2020.
Yeah.
So when you have a liquidity crisis where there's no dry powder available, and people they're having margin calls and blah, 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 blah.
Yep.
What happens?
Yeah.
Everything drops. Yeah. Everything. So
people are like, I can't hold in Bitcoin now because I need fiat.
Yeah. I got to pay my rent, you know? So I think that's what I've been trying to warn people, is that everything is in a bubble.
Yep.
Bubbles usually don't end well. You know, they usually implode.
Especially the bigger that they get.
Exactly. And you don't usually have a bubble. It's very rare to have hyperinflationary death cycles where the currency actually dies, particularly given that we are still the reserve currency of the world, technically, or not technically, but in reality, we still are for the most part. So I think that's why I think that there's an important hedge in that direction, which most libertarians overlook. However, on the off chance that they do print us into oblivion and that they don't increase interest rates, which would create these deflationary pressures, I think it's extremely important that you have inflation protected hedges. I don't think real estate's a good one because it's so tied to debt, but I think gold, silver, precious metals, and then cryptocurrencies make a lot of sense on the other side.
Sure. I actually bought some additional precious metals the other day, and it was from the same site that I had been using for several years. Mm-hmm. And so I saw my purchases from like 2018, 2019. And I'm just like, Jesus Christ, why didn't I just buy a whole lot more then?
I know, right?
Than right now. Maybe I shouldn't have gone back and looked at those historical, those purchases, because now I'm getting, 2/3 or half of what I was able to get. At that time.
If you do that with Bitcoin, you'll never buy.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, no, that's great, because one of the things too that I really push into on my show, and especially to people that are very liberty oriented, is that I always, because we tend to believe stronger in the idea of the community and the individual, right? And so I tend to tell people that we, especially as liberty oriented people, have a moral obligation to be as financially successful as we possibly can. And what I mean by that generally is, if we have the means to be able to take care of those people around us, right, then we have an obligation to do so. Mm-hmm. And I think knowledge and experience like that is very important for people, because people can quote Rothbard all day long, but if you're still a pizza delivery driver, there's not a whole lot that you're really able to do with that kind of thing.
Not a lot.
You could still be reliant on government for whatever various reasons. And so being able to achieve that financial success and that financial freedom is very important. And when did you get to the point? Because for the listeners that aren't aware, you're essentially semi-retired, and we're about the same age, so you're a little bit ahead of me as far as the goals go. But when did you get to that point where you really kind of felt that you had the financial freedom to where you felt you could breathe a little bit, you could take a sigh of relief, and you could start looking at other opportunities and other ways to really be able to advance more of your long-term goals?
Yeah, for me, I just kept my head down and grinded for so many years. My passive income, because I always saved and reinvested, my passive income just got to be so significant over time. And I was like, man, I'm making more money without working than I need to live off of.
Right.
It finally hit me, and I was like, damn, I did it. Like I am financially free. To me, the definition of financial freedom is where your investments throw off enough cash after taxes annually that you don't have to work. Yeah. That's financial freedom. Right. Because at that point, I can take any risk I want. I can start a fucking podcast like a psychopath and be like, I'm going to do something here.
Right. Because everybody starts a podcast going, well, I'll just be the next Tom Woods, right? And then I'll be 15 episodes in and I'll have 100,000 people an episode,
It doesn't work that way.
Right.
No, it doesn't work that way. And I think that because I have that added flexibility, I don't have a day job I have to go to. I get to spend half my day reading Twitter and trying to grow my Twitter audience there. I get to spend half my time, reading books and trying to broaden my philosophical depth. And then I get to spend the other, chunk of my time actually recording with people and reaching out to people for guest spots that probably shouldn't be wasting their time with me, but they do, that type of stuff. That's the whole podcast game. And because I love it so much, I've probably worked harder and put in more hours into my podcasting over the past year than I probably did with my business when I first started it. Like, it's just because I love it so much, and I'm not making really hardly any money from it, but it's like, it's just my passion.
Yeah.
So I love it.
And I think too, when I was inferring earlier that I had a theory about why you have seen as much success as you had, and authenticity, I think is the big one, right? When I listen to your show and I hear the passion and I hear the authenticity that's there, I think that's really what drives people coming back.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm sure probably a lot of people in the audience would also agree with that, because a lot of times people can listen to a show and maybe they're charismatic or or whatever the quality they may have. The ones that really are successful are the ones that are really able to take those kinds of qualities and then mix in that passion and that authenticity. And I don't think a lot of people out there do. And I think that's one of the reasons why that you've been, like I said, as successful as you have.
Oh, that's great to hear. I mean, I really feel like this stuff courses through my veins. Like, it just genuinely does. So it's not performative. It's not an act. When I'm on the mic and I'm talking about this stuff, I fucking mean every single word of it. Right. I love it. I mean it. I believe it. I feel it. And I just try and convey that emotion to people in a way that's compelling. But ultimately, if I was a fraud, I think people would sense it, and I'm not a fraud, so they're not going to sense that. And I think you're right, that people do gravitate towards that.
Yeah, and one of the things too that I appreciate too is that there's also several pieces of shows that you do that also make people start thinking. So I know you and we talked a little bit about the conversation that you had with Ben Armani about the container, right? And that being kind of a different alternative way to think about things. One of the other pieces of it too that really stood out was whenever you interviewed Isaac Morehouse.
Yes.
And
those are two of my favorite interviews. So
yeah, well, which is good because they're recent, and I think it's also showing how how you're progressing and you're getting better. Because things like that can stick out. And for Isaac, the big one that really stood out, and I think it's very important for libertarians and the liberty community as a whole, is when he talked about that government isn't going away, right? And so the game is navigating and understanding, well, what do I need to do now to pivot my business or to adjust to deal with additional regulations and that kind of thing. And so you coming from real estate, especially after 08, 09, was that a big part of it? Because I know with a lot of legislation that was coming through, that whole industry really got thrown for a loop with a bunch of different stuff going on in DC. And so when he was saying that kind of stuff, was it really resonating with what you were going through at that period?
Oh yeah, it was awful. I mean, the Dodd-Frank laws that got rolled out to basically criminalize my industry, or try and make it as small as humanly possible so that we could barely make a living. Yeah, it was devastating and it was catastrophic. But what it taught me is that, if you stay small enough, you can basically still stay off their radar. Or if you have giant balls, you can just grow yourself to the point that you can buy the politicians. And I didn't want to go that route.
Right.
I didn't have that.
Especially being in California, right? Because those politicians aren't cheap.
No, they're not cheap. And I would have had to have, probably 100-person shop. I would have had to go hard in the paint. I would have had to been working 80 hours a week and just, going totally crazy. And basically I discovered I could make a very, very good living just working 30 hours a week, and I could still play beach volleyball. And basically, having worked for my dad, I had worked really hard and I wasn't making any money. And then I started work on my own. I didn't have to work very hard and I was making way better money. And I was like, oh, my quality of life matters. Like it clicked all of a sudden. So I think that's another important thing to remember, is that, like, if you're not a happy person, you're probably not going to be able to win this fight. Like, you need to find some joy in this path, because if it's just a miserable grind day in and day out, you're going to give up. Like, because why would you do that to yourself? So you have to find some balance, some joy. Make sure that no matter how desperate the odds are that we actually topple the state or anything like that, you have to find happiness in this process. So that's what I've been doing lately.
Yeah, and I think too, the positivity there is another aspect that I really enjoy, because everything ends up being so depressing, right? Everything that you read,
it's easy to get depressed.
Absolutely, especially too with our mindset, where you're reaching out and you're saying, how come you guys don't see this, and how come you don't understand it? And every time one person makes a comment like that, another 99 people come and go, well, you're an idiot. And then you're like, how do we win this? How do we win this fight? Which I think you had basically at this point, right, have said, I'm not going to try to win this fight in California. I think that this fight is basically lost, and I'm peacing out of here. That's in July, right?
Yeah. I'm gonna find somewhere, hopefully in America, that I can move to. My plan is to do the Liberty Lockdown World Tour or National Tour,
or at least the continental 48 states, right?
Yeah, exactly. The national tour. So I'm going to try and I got approved for a media row pass to Freedom Fest, which is at Mount Rushmore, which is like a 4 or 5 day event. Dave Smith and Tom Woods and all these people will be there, including Dr. Drew and some other people. That is going to be really cool. And allegedly, since I'm on Media Row, I should be able to get them all to come on my podcast, which will be amazing.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, those are some big names. Now, is Pork Fest then in New Hampshire also on the route that you're?
That's in June, and I don't my house, which I just sold, I have a lease back until July 16th. So I don't want to take a trip before I give up on this beautiful house. So I'm gonna use my time here.
Well, I will say that everybody in New Hampshire is probably going to be pretty disappointed to hear that.
I know the people in New Hampshire are literally DMing me constantly saying, you have to come out to Pork Fest. And I'm like, I would love to, man, but it's just I'm still building 6 houses. I need to get those done and sold before I leave California. Sure. So like, you gotta prioritize some things,
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now I know too, you're talking about a road tour. Now you've only brought up one event. Do you have some other things that you're planning on kind of hitting along the way? I know Tom Woods' 2000th episode is in Orlando in October.
Yeah.
We're here in Nashville, so we're like right here kind of in the middle. And that kind of thing. Is there anything else specific that you're intending to kind of hit along the way?
I know there's a lot of like anarchist festivals and stuff, and libertarian festivals. So I'm going to try and add as many as I can to the route, basically, and just try and get the name out there. I think it makes a lot of sense because what I'm really doing with this is to try and find somewhere where there's still a semblance of a feeling of liberty in this country. And so I want to go to every state that doesn't have income tax, every state that has decent gun laws, or as minimal gun laws as possible, I should
Sure.
say. So I want to start with Freedom Fest just because that's where the timing works out, and then hit like Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Florida, all the quote unquote free states. See if any of them suit me, and New Hampshire. I'm sorry,
Sure.
Pork Fest folks, and then just end it with the Tom Woods event in November.
Oh yeah, or October.
Excuse me, October.
Yeah, October. If you go there to the Rosa in November, you're going to be very disappointed.
Yeah, I would imagine. Orlando is not on my list otherwise.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of swampy and it's hot, you know.
No thanks.
And it's very humid. Now I know too that you also had Jeremy Kaufman on, and who is the founder and the creator of Odyssey, which is a new YouTube, as I think he liked to refer to it as the successor of YouTube.
Yeah, it's incredible.
And he was hyping up New Hampshire, because being part of the Free State Project. One of the concerns, and I don't know if this is something that also concerned you, is that when it came to a lot of the mandates and that kind of thing, I mean, New Hampshire was right. I mean, they were right there with everybody else. Mandates went in immediately, and they were actually one of the latter states to actually start removing those.
I know.
I don't know if some of the free staters, or if you have heard anything along those lines. My assumption is that the governor is not a free stater, and so despite the fact that they have a large amount of state legislators, at the end of the day, it's kind of his call. I didn't know if you had any specific thoughts as far as New Hampshire kind of live free or die, but wear a mask too.
but not. Yeah. I think that's exactly what Jeremy said. I forget exactly, but he was like, we had a bad governor,
Yeah.
And I think that the truth is that we need to get a serious libertarian elected as a governor of a state. Like, if you want a free state project, you're going to need a governor who's a libertarian. So
right.
I hope that happens. I know Shane Hazel is interested in doing that in Georgia. So those are the types of things that I think are going to be necessary to actually prevail. I do still think that the Free State Project is a great idea. I think that they can make a lot of headway. I think that they can create a community, which is really beautiful. So I'm not canceling it off my list, but I would absolutely be lying if I said the fact that they didn't have enough political clout to prevent the lockdowns and to prevent the mask mandates makes me feel like maybe that's not the place for me yet.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But again, I think you bring up a good point too, because when you're narrowing down 50 states, like 40 of them are basically immediately crossed off.
Yeah, it's very easy to eliminate 40 of them.
Right. And so when you're only working with 10 or so, you're kind of like, well, yeah, but that one's all right here, and that one's okay here. So, maybe we can make some exceptions and that
exactly.
Kind of
well, and let's be honest, if they had Florida weather and they had the Free State Project, it would probably be more up my alley. I'm born and raised San Diego, man. I am gonna die in those winters.
I was gonna ask you about South Dakota, because I would have thought South Dakota might have been there, but then I'm like, how is a San Diego boy gonna make it in South Dakota?
I don't know, man. I don't know. This is why I lean towards Texas and Florida, just because I know myself, and I mean, I guess I don't know myself well enough to know if I can handle winter, but I don't think I can. So
right, I could see you there in the wintertime, right? And you're all bundled up, and you're like, why did I do this? I'm really missing California.
Yeah, well, I mean, on the upside, because I do have financial freedom, and South Dakota is not that far away from California, I could come back and visit family during the winter. Right. It might be an okay option, but I'm honestly, I'm not even committed to the continental U.S. I am open to going globally if I have to. Like, if I drive around the entire country and I don't get the feeling like this is where I'm supposed to be, I'm going to look internationally too and just see if I can figure something out. I'm not married. I don't have kids yet, but I do have financial freedom to do this. So I feel like this is my opportunity to figure it out, and I'm going to do my due diligence.
Absolutely. And I know too, when you were chatting with Vin Armani, and obviously he's in Saipan, which it sounds great and it sounds beautiful. And obviously it is beautiful. And the things that they're able to do in Saipan is pretty amazing. But then when I was looking at that, I'm also thinking, well, the economy there is essentially built off the back of the U.S. government, right? Because it's got the military bases in Guam and that kind of thing. And so, I mean, if shit was to really hit the fan, a very lonely, isolated island in the middle of the Pacific, I mean, I think you're stuck. Like,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, I mean, that may be the best place to be stuck, but you
that
would
is true.
probably be
That
stuck.
is true. Yeah, that is true. I mean, I'm sitting there going, I was like, I know he mentioned spearfishing and stuff, and I'm like, I don't know if you're not importing any food. I don't know if you're going to be able to, run out of bananas and coconuts and fish to spearfish with.
It's a good question. I know island living usually does require a lot of imports. So yeah, they could be jeopardized. I mean, the truth is you're not gonna find utopia on
Yeah,
this planet right now. The
yeah.
the statist yoke is too thick and it's just basically impossible, but you can find something that fits you best. So I don't know. I honestly have no idea where that's going to be at this point.
But hey, that's life, right? I mean, that's the adventure.
Yep.
And like we were talking about before, being able to have that financial freedom, it affords you the ability to be able to do that. Because my guess is there's probably just within the Liberty community as a whole, tens of thousands of people that were like, oh my God, do you know what Clint's doing? Oh, how I wish I could do, how I wish I could do something like that.
I
Right.
hope it inspires them to prepare to do that too. That'd be
Absolutely.
great.
That's what I was
Yeah.
going to say. And hopefully people will be motivated and be inspired to say, hey, maybe that's something that that I would want to do as well. I
Exactly.
know I have some friends that actually do. I mean, I can't remember what they call it, but they basically just live out of their RV, right? And they just
Yeah.
travel, they travel, or overlanding, I think is what it's called. And there's a lot of people that have kind of migrated a bit, a bit towards that as well.
Hmm.
Well, as far as the podcast goes, I mean, that sounds like that's kind of the focus now. Is there anything as far as business oriented, long-term business? Now, obviously you have extensive knowledge and experience in the real estate game.
Hmm.
Is there anything that you're tossing around in the brain as far as getting back into kind of a business type environment?
I would be open to it in Texas because they don't require licensing for what I do in California, which is private money lending. So I'm not opposed to that. If I end up planted in Texas, I'll probably reopen and do limited
So put
lending.
that one a little W there for Texas then.
That's a big W, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I can make really good passive income, from doing that without having to work too hard, and that's always sounds good to me. So that's of interest. Florida, unfortunately, has pretty harsh lending laws that I'm not really interested in participating in. I haven't really looked at much of the other states just because they're not at the top of my list because I'm so concerned about winter. But
Sure.
if I go to one of them and I'm like in love with it, otherwise I'll have to research that stuff and figure it out. And then additionally, other business ideas. I'd be interested in writing something at some point. I had always thought about being a college professor because I thought that would be really fun to try and be that countervailing force to
Sure.
the
Well,
leftist
I hate to be the
education.
bearer of bad news because I don't like negativity, but I can't imagine there's a lot of universities that are like, that's the guy we want. We
No,
want,
no,
you
you're
know.
totally right. I think that the opportunity would be very challenging to find, but if I found it, I would be a very unique voice for a bunch of college
Sure.
students to listen to. So I think that would be interesting. But at the end of the day, I'm reaching way more people with my podcast than I could students in a classroom. So like,
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that just putting all my eggs in one basket, kind of with the podcasting right now is what I'm most passionate about. I'm also interested as I do this RV trip. If I find any entrepreneurs that I really believe in that approached me, God, I don't even want to say this because now I'm going to have people throwing business ideas at me.
I can edit it out. It's all right.
Yeah. I'm just saying, if I meet someone at an event and it organically comes up, you don't pitch me like a psychopath, and it organically comes up and you have some sort of like blockchain technology or something that is aligned with me philosophically,
Right.
and you also seem to just need capital to get you over the hump, I'd be interested in investing in some things like that. So kind of a angel investor type future for me, plus the podcasting, plus real estate investing, plus I'll probably buy more rental properties when this market tanks, which I expect over the next 5 years. So
Sure.
those are all the path for me.
Yeah, and then anything too, because I'm also thinking. Obviously, you've been a very vocal voice in the Liberty movement. Obviously, other than being on the Dave Smith cabinet or whatever for president,
That would be a dream.
any political goals or anything that you would potentially consider doing that's involving more of the party as a whole.
Yeah, I'd be open to it. I had a Mises Caucus event at my house. Angela McCardle was here, and there was like 20, 25 people or something. So that was cool. I haven't been involved in the LP or politics my entire life. I've been an entrepreneur, and that's all I've been interested in. But I
Sure.
am obviously more politically motivated and aligned right now. So I'm not opposed to it. I think I do have people, prodding me to do it sometimes now. So
Yeah.
I'm open to the idea. I think it would just have to fit really perfectly. Like it would have to be that I move somewhere that they were like, you got a real shot of winning if you were to run in XYZ race. But yeah, I'd be open to it.
No, I think that's great because one of the other things too I was thinking about earlier is I saw that I guess they were looking at potentially doing Michael Malice as the press secretary, secretary or whatever. And I'm sitting there going, I was like, I'm talking to Clint later. I wonder in a Dave Smith administration, where does he see himself? Is he like the minister of propaganda or?
That's exactly what I have messaged Dave saying exactly that. I said, if you need a speechwriter, I am your guy. Like, or a minister of propaganda, as you said. Like, that's what we need. We need someone who can craft propaganda. And apparently, based off my Twitter account, I do a decent job at it. So I'm like, hey, I'm just throwing my hat in the ring. Like, if you need me, obviously Dave's doesn't need a lot of help, but he's going to need some help if he actually makes a serious run at this thing. So I think it's all hands on deck. If we can help him, that'd be great.
Yeah, I know. Not too long ago when we got together with some of the the folks here in Nashville, that was the part of the conversation that evening, right? I think it was the day that he did Rogan's show where he was humoring it, and that kind of thing. And I'm sitting there going, I was like, well, that's gonna throw the Twitterverse into a tizzy.
Yeah. Well, he told me about it once we were off air when I was on Part of the Problem. So I knew about this months in advance, and I had to keep my mouth shut the entire time. So I'm glad that he's now saying that he's considering it, because when he told me he was considering it, I was like, oh my God, do it, please.
Yeah.
So
see,
it's great.
But then I was on the flip side where I'm sitting there thinking, one of the concerns that I would have is that I actually became a fan of his through Legion of Skanks. Because that circle of guys were friends with some of the radio shows and I had listened to and that kind of thing. And I'm sitting there thinking, I'm like, well, when the smear campaigns come out, I mean, they have years, right, of Dave saying some of the most obscene, crazy things, which can be spun in any way. But then, I was convinced by some of the other guys that were basically saying, yeah, but who cares, right? I mean, that's the messaging, getting the platform and stuff out there. And there's going to be so much pushback, especially in several years from, the wokeness ideology and that kind of thing that
we can be on the front of it.
Exactly. Yeah. And people are going to sit there and go, finally, somebody who is speaking honest and, and talks like a normal person.
Right. I think it's an extremely powerful tool to be first, to have courage, to be bold, to get in front of something that is unpopular at the time. But deep down, even though it's unpopular, people still feel like you're right. And if you can do that before it's actually permitted to, that's when people start to fucking listen to you. And that's why I think that's why my show has been successful too, because they recognize I am willing to say anything. I can be politically incorrect. Yeah. People like it though. They like the raw, truthful honesty from the heart talk. And Dave will do that. And that's why, I don't give a shit that he said inappropriate stuff on Legion of Skanks. That's half the reason I love the guy. Right, and if he gets bad publicity from it, we can spin it into good. Because if they say he's some evil white supremacist, have him go on and talk about Yemen for 20 minutes.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Yeah.
So it's a win. As far as I'm concerned, it's a win.
And you bring up too that a lot of people, deep down would be supportive of that. And I think that is where a lot of the big Trump support came from, because
100%.
You would almost think, just from talking to people, you're like, nobody ever voted for this guy, right? Because people were almost afraid, to admit it, because they're like, well, if I said that I did at work, I'd be ostracized, because, the handful of people who are the very vocal people are saying all of these things. And then they're like, well, who cares what they think? I'm going to vote and I'm just going to keep it quiet.
Exactly. I would love to have a study on the amount of people that had Biden yard signs but voted for Trump, because it was so much about appearances, because the guy won. I mean, well, not this most recent election, but if you want to go the prior one, it's like, I'm sure there was Hillary signs with Trump voters inside.
Right.
Like, I am sure of it. And that's so funny to me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the funny part about that too, right, is that it was so unbelievable that, I mean, it was a 4-year conspiracy that involved Russia. That was like, there was no way he won this. It was impossible. It had to be Russia, which Scott Horton must have loved, because he got like, you know, a quarter of his episodes during that time talking about Russiagate, which was great.
Him and Dave both made a mint off that content for sure.
Oh, it was beautiful. And so speaking of some of those guys, again, you know, almost at 100 episodes, you know, really seeing a lot of change and improvement and growth. Who would you say are some of probably your biggest influences when it comes to, I mean, I feel like I could probably name them,
probably,
but, you know, that you would say has really kind of helped guide you into what your show has become now?
I would say number one for sure is Dave Smith. I mean, I heard him for the first time maybe 4 or 5 years ago on Joe Rogan Experience, because I was a Joe Rogan listener, and it was the first time I had heard my libertarianism ever said on a major platform, and it was received positively, which I was like, oh my God,
right,
we can do this. We can actually make a career out of talking about what we're passionate about. So when I saw that, I was like, in the back of my mind, even though I was crushing it in my business, I was like, now this is on my list. Now I'm interested in giving this a shot. So that obviously Ron Paul, his ideology, his philosophy, he is largely, you know, why I am what I am.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that he deserves major credit. I don't know that there's honestly, I think maybe Joe Rogan, because I listened to him for so many thousands of hours. I think it really helped with my conversational abilities and my ability to stay in the conversation and go with the flow and bring humor and passion and you know,
and
sometimes sadness
people
to
have that long form conversational ability, right?
Yes.
I bet whenever Joe is doing his show, he could probably do the same thing that Amy Coney Barrett did, right? Where she held up the notepad and it was like empty, you know, because he's just so conversational that he's like, it would slow me down and hurt me if I was to have a notepad full of talking points, you know, kind of thing.
Absolutely. And that's, I think that's been, I guess, a skill set that I didn't necessarily get from Rogan, but something that I appreciated about him. And then I found that I had something similar to that in me. And so I think people like that about it. So that's probably an influence. And then some of the stupider, funnier shows that I listen to, like Your Mom's House and
I've never even heard of that one.
Oh man, you got to check it out. It's Christina P. and Tom Segura, this married comedian couple.
I do know who Tom Segura is. Okay,
all right. Yeah, I mean, it is so debaucherous. They just find the worst clips on the internet, and then they do these audio drops of them all the time, and it's just great. So that, Legion of Skanks, some of these other Two Bears, One Cave, which is Tom Segura, Burt Kreischer, a handful of like these really dumb audio comedy podcasts also have an influence on me, because like I go on to Tower Power Hour podcast, which is with the Tower Gang guys, which is these Twitter idiots that I love to death, and we kind of do our own version of Legion of Skanks. So I try and keep it like humorous and fun, but we still shift back to, you know, philosophy and principles sometimes. So I just love everything about this medium. I love getting to meet people. It's just so cool.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think too, one of the benefits of this platform in general is the ability to be able to have those honest conversations, right?
Totally.
When I'm in the car and I'm driving around, I actually listen to NPR, which people are probably listening going, why in the world would you ever listen to NPR?
You got to know what the enemy's saying, man.
Right. That's exactly right. That's my thought process is that it's important for me to understand, you know, the mentality. But what you'll find when you listen to platforms like that is that the conversations are 2 minutes, 3 minutes.
Oh yeah.
You know, and they'll cut people off when they're trying to answer a question. And I'm like, you can't, I mean, you know, Dave Smith has admitted that whenever he goes on TV, right?
Oh, it's terrible.
You don't learn anything about anybody. You don't learn, you know, I mean, everything is so shallow when it comes to the content. It's just impossible.
There's no nuance. It's awful.
And I think if that level of conversation was to get beyond that shallow level, you would find out how empty it is. You know? I mean, when people are trying to defend a lot of those concepts and a lot of those beliefs, you just ask a few questions and the whole thought would just fall apart.
Right.
You
Well,
know?
Dave's a perfect example of that. When he was on SE Cup show and they would have these idiots come on, they would get their 2-minute clip. Dave would get his 2-minute response where he annihilates them, and then it would go to commercial.
Yeah.
Or the girl would just like laugh and be like, "Ha ha, you don't know what you're talking about," and then it goes to commercial. So you don't get to see, she gets to have the excuse of, "Oh well, we have to go to commercial break," so you don't get to hear my response, which would have totally destroyed his. I just get to laugh it off. But if you're on Joe Rogan Experience and you say something stupid, you got 3 hours to answer that shit.
Right. So he just looks at his watch and goes, "All right, you got an hour and 45 minutes. Go."
Yeah. It's like, good luck hiding from a hard question on a 3-hour conversation.
Right.
So yeah, I love the format. I think it's really important. And I think that as we slip down this dystopic path of censorship and wrongthink and watching what you say and self-censorship too, which is a huge problem, these platforms will become bigger and bigger. And as people cut the cords too, I think that's another thing that I've been thinking about lately. As people cut the cords to cable, and you have these free, YouTube or Odyssey videos of people talking about things that you don't hear anywhere else. You're going to pick up some viewers. So I think that even though we're late, because obviously 2010 was when podcasting got really going, we're still in the early stages. It's kind of like Bitcoin. People are like, "Oh, it's too late." I'm like, it's still pretty early. It's only been around for like 11 years. Come on.
Yeah. It's at 9,000 and then you look back at it now and you're like, 9,000.
That was cheap.
Man, that was so early.
Exactly.
No, I look at that in some of the crypto decisions that I had made, because I had got in around 2017, 2018 when it kind of spiked, and then
you're not retired?
No, I thought I was a genius, right? And so I diversified into all of these shit coins, and then the bottom completely fell out. And then I'm like, well, I'm just not going to look at this for a few years. And then sure enough, I pick it back up in like 2020, and 90% of them were at zero.
Wow.
And so like I consolidated down some of them, and I think it equaled out to be like a half a Bitcoin or or whatever it might have been. But yeah, I mean, I think you're right. And as far as the platforms go, and one of the things that I've noticed, and maybe you've also noticed the same thing, is that other mediums like Clubhouse, right, is also been gaining a lot of popularity. And you're starting to see some of the old gatekeepers, right, the New York Times and those guys kind of, quote unquote, declaring war on shutting down some of these, right? Because the way they're looking at it is that they're uncensored. And so they immediately say, well, it's a platform of white supremacy and whatever, whatever it might be. And so I think you're right that continuing to pick up the momentum in this world is probably the way that it's going to displace that type of an old medium.
And it'll have the power of driving ideological dissidents towards you, because as more and more people are thrown off social media and whatnot, they will be, as opposed to people becoming more monolithic and having less critical thought, I think it's going to force people to have more and to seek out more external information. As the news becomes more of a monolith and you can't get any difference of opinion, you're going to be like, I want to find someone who's saying something that I actually agree with, for the love of God. So yeah, I think that the trend is not hopeless. It's dim, but it's not hopeless.
Yeah, I think Tom Woods actually brought it up. He did a show not that long ago where they talked about curiosity, right? And I think that's something that a lot of the people in the liberty community have a lot of.
Massively,
is curiosity. Always asking questions, always trying to learn. And that's something that when I do my show, I really try to hammer home, because I know I'm not going to convert people over to being an ANCAP, in a week.
No.
It's not going to happen. But if I can get people to question, why is the federal government giving K through 12 schools $200 billion when 70% of them are already reopened and they only spent $4 billion? Why? And start asking those questions and trying to get curious, about those kinds of things, and really trying to drive those types of conversations. And you've done a great job, like I said, interviewing with a lot of people that offer that kind of alternative viewpoint that really kind of get people thinking.
Yeah, totally. I think that's really our job here. It's not to necessarily change the world, but it's to make our little bit of difference that might eventually change the world.
Yeah,
because I think like Ron Paul didn't become the president, but he might be the spark that lights the flame that is Dave Smith, that is maybe Clint or Danny Hudson, or it could like who knows who ends up actually being the hero that brings liberty back in our lifetime. But let's hope it happens.
And that was mine back in 2008. I was actually living in Orlando at the time, and he was in town for a debate. And so again, this is a 75-year-old guy on stage debating, and we were downtown. The Ron Paul support group was downtown watching the debate. And after the debate, it's 10:30 at night, and he actually came downtown, spoke to a crowd of like 45, 50 of us. I got my picture with him. He autographed my hat, and he didn't leave until the last person. I mean, he was there at midnight,
That's amazing.
And that kind of thing. And I'm sitting there going,
what a legend.
Oh man, I know. And it's still, kind of one of the highlights. It really stands out, and it kind of always will.
For sure, man.
That's so to wrap up, I know you're getting close to your 100th episode. You're not that far away. You have anybody that you're shooting for, that you're trying to get on for the big 100?
I mean, obviously the dream would be Ron Paul. I mean, that would be unbelievable. Follow up, and I don't mean any disrespect to them. I hope that they will appreciate the fact that I put Ron Paul on the top. Obviously Tom Woods would be very interesting. Maj Touré or Eric July. Those are my four. I'm sure I could think of others.
3 of the 4 in your entry song, I believe, and they're the three of the ones that you haven't quite had on yet.
Totally, and I didn't even include Ron Paul just because I couldn't think of something to rhyme with it.
It's not the easiest. That's great, and so all right, so you've got that, and so where would you also like to see the show, kind of evolve to in the long run? Because it doesn't sound like you plan to slow down. So where would you like to see it, go to in the future?
That's a good question. Honestly, it's all been organic. I haven't had a real, this is what I'm doing here. I just kind of give it my all every day, and I just try and see how good it can get and how big it can get. So I think for me, that's the most important thing. I don't have any end point. I don't have a destination. Obviously, if I could get to a point where the show itself provides enough passive income that I can totally not worry about even my investment life, if that would be amazing. If I could live anywhere in the world and still have enough income from the show, that would be fantastic. So I think that would probably be my dream end spot, is if I just make enough money to live off of talking into a microphone about shit I care about. That'd be phenomenal.
Right. And have people on there contributing, be like, I'm really glad that I'm, like Reed, right? I'm really glad that I can drive a truck and help contribute to content on your show, so you don't actually have to do anything.
That would be pretty cool. So no, I mean, obviously I just want to reach even if I didn't ever make a penny, if I could reach 1 million ears, that would be worth more than any paycheck I could ever get. So I don't know, but wherever it goes, whatever. I think that the biggest thing people have to remember, I have these other guys that have been asking me, how did you do it? And I'm like, dude, this is a meritocracy. There's no tricks here. You just have to go. If you get the right people to listen, if you sound good, if you like it, if you get good guests on, the key is, if you have a big guest and they listen, do they just listen to the guest and then leave? Or do they listen to you interacting with the guest and go, I have to hear what this guy says next?
Absolutely. Yeah.
If they're not asking that, you're never going anywhere. So you gotta step the game up too. So I'm not speaking to you, by the way. I'm talking to
no, that's fine. That is a-okay. I'm good with that. Well, the show is Liberty Lockdown. Do you want to get your plugs out and that kind of thing?
Sure. Yeah, at Liberty Lock Pod on Twitter, Liberty Lockdown on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, Instagram, and pretty much any other podcatcher. Check me out. Appreciate you so much.
Do you actually put a lot of content on Instagram?
I just started to 3 days ago. So I had not been using it at all, but now I am.
Because I'm the same way. I have one, and I'll log in. I go, what the hell am I supposed to do on here?
I felt the same way. I actually have someone that's helping me out with it to put really, really professional clips and things together. So it's going to be worth following me on there. So definitely check me out. Liberty Lockdown on Instagram.
Absolutely. Well, I follow you on YouTube, so I'll have to follow you on a couple of the other ones too, to help beef up your numbers.
I'll do the same, brother. Appreciate it.
Perfect. All right. Well, Clint, I really appreciate it, and you have a wonderful rest of your evening, and we'll stay in touch.
Absolutely, Danny.
All right,
Great
buddy.
show.
All right. Bye.
See ya.